Hello and welcome to Your Business, Your Wealth. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the CEO of Sound Financial Group, and today we're going to talk about some of the things that your kids are learning in school that you don't know about. This can be a little bit of controversial. I don't mean to come straight at teachers and the school systems. They are trying to do their best. They're trying to keep things interesting for kids, but keeping things exciting and interesting for kids is not a good idea to teach them long-term healthy habits, especially around their money. Now, what you may not realize is every single year, over 1 million kids are being exposed to these risky behaviors. These risky behaviors are stock trading courses. Now, we're going to cite an article today from Wall Street Journal, Jason Zweig, some of his content we've looked at in the past, and what students really learn from stock market games. So it's very normal that in a finance or math class that teachers will institute an online trading platform that gives kids the opportunity to trade with a fictional $100,000. They'll have the ability then to trade on margin, pick individual securities, and the game is to create the greatest amount of appreciation in their portfolio possible over a 10-week period of time. Now, you guys can get a chance to read this article. Of course, it's linked to our page below, and then you can access the article from there. But what you may not understand in doing this is that it is interesting. It does teach kids the basics of maybe what a stock or a bond is or what an option is. But the problem that it creates is it creates an issue of children learning to assess the success or failure of their investment strategies over a 10-week period of time. Now, here's the thing. We talked about this as a consistent theme on this show, that one of the things we need to do is assess our financial strategies over decades. Almost all of you listening to this are probably under the age of 50. But even if you're 60 years old right now, you need to plan, unless you're in very poor health, you need to plan with our medical technology being what it is, with the access to healthy foods, and just what we know about keeping our bodies able well into our later years, is that you've got to be an investor for decades and decades to come, even if you're 60 now. Because of that, we're teaching kids that what they should be doing is trading aggressively on individual stocks. And this is something that's been overwhelmingly proven that it's enabled to give people long-term success. As a matter of fact, it not only gives them a proof of not having long-term financial success, it's not even likely that they will outperform inflation if this is the way they trade, which has been proven time and time again in the studying of individual trading accounts, is that individuals trading their own accounts tend not to outperform inflation. And even the highest level asset managers in the world tend not to even outperform the indexes they're being compared to. So as we get in here, we see that this one girl, Emma Freeman, kudos to her for winning the state's championship, and she turned $100,000 into $550,000 in just 10 weeks. And what she ended up doing was just picking stocks. She decided to treat it as a day trading strategy. And she crushed it over the 10 weeks. Now, most of the kids don't do anywhere near that well. Another kid named Zach got up to $583,000. But one thing that I love is a quote that Jason put in here from Warren Buffett about how Buffett repeatedly warns investors not to use leverage. You can click through to that. It's in 33 and some change from the afternoon session from 2004. So if you click on that, it's the 2004 session of Berkshire Hathaway, and then scroll down to question number 33. Leverage is the biggest danger to investors. And what Buffett talks about in that article is just the mere fact that while you go out and invest, that there will be this volatility, but if you stay diversified and you rebalance that portfolio, as long as you don't take on leverage. And by the way, the reason he says leverage can get you in trouble is it's the thing that can force you to sell in a market where it's an inopportune time to sell. So as we go down further in this article, what you can see is that these students participate in it. Some teachers allow students to use margin, about 14% of them, but overwhelmingly, the kids don't grow their money. And now here's the problem. So what you learn is most kids don't grow their money. Somebody using a strategy you should use as an adult, this idea of a diversified portfolio rebalanced on a consistent basis while organizing the rest of your financial life in a way that makes sure that you don't have to sell unnecessarily. Well, that knowledge would absolutely lose you this competition because you're just going to get market rates of return over that period of time. So not only are they encouraging risky behaviors in kids, the parents and the parents of the other students in the class that see this kid crushing it, $550,000 over this period of time, you know what they don't talk about is the survivor bias. How many of these kids ended up with less than $100,000? How many of these kids barely got a rate of return at all? And how many of these families then mark their success or failure as investing their family's capital, the retirement capital of these parents? They now get a warped sense because the only kids that you hear about out of the millions that do this every year are the ones who absolutely crushed it. And they live in legend in their class for that year, both with their fellow students, the students that know about it who are either side of that class in age, and the parents of those families hear about it. And it can mess up what appropriate expectations should be and what planning should look like. So here's what I would suggest for you to be able to counter this massive amount of misinformation that's being propagated in schools across the country. Number one, if your kids are having this in their class, I would say ask the teacher to also present material about how most people don't benefit from day trading. If you guys need that material, something to source, you can email me personally. You can send it to info@sfgwa.com, and we will send you the material you would need that teacher could teach it in 5 or 10 minutes in one of their classes during this 10 weeks about we are playing a game here to teach you about how stocks work. This is not how investing should work when you're older. Number two, have the conversation with your kids that literally this is a game. And the way you would win at this game is not the way you're going to win in life. And then talk to them about the way that you invest your money. That as you invest your money, you're going to put yourself in the position to A, have a little bit of accountability. B, you're going to talk to your kids about actual money. And last but not least, you're going to be teaching your kids how it is you invest money over decades and decades and decades so that you become financially independent, so that you're not one day living with your children. Because if you trade like these kids trade, where you're trading on margin, you're selecting individual stocks, the likelihood of you being successful at that strategy is infinitesimal. It's infinitesimal that you be successful with it on a year-to-year basis, like 2 or 3 years in a row, and even smaller for you to be successful with it over decades. And yet you can have a conversation with your kids about what you're doing with your money. Maybe you talk actual dollar amounts, but you don't need to do that. You could just talk about the way you're investing your 401k and why in a 401k you don't invest this way. You could talk about the way you invest in your IRAs or your non-qualified joint account with your spouse. That the reason you don't pick individual stocks is because of the long-term outcomes that come from this kind of trading. Basically, it comes down to the same kind of things as video games. If you were teaching your child how to drive, you wouldn't do it using Gran Turismo, because driving a Lamborghini at 200 miles an hour on a city street is not how you would want a child to learn about the way to handle a motor vehicle on a daily basis on your city streets. And yet we're teaching that equivalent to kids in their classroom every single year, millions a year, or at least 1 million a year. And these kids are left with either, I didn't succeed, but look how other people did, leaving an emotional wound or scar that they should be getting some better rate of return than the market. Rather, we should be teaching kids that the way to produce long-term financial success is to have a portfolio that is adjusted to their risk tolerance, that puts them in the position that they can achieve market returns, so that on an inflation-adjusted basis, their wealth is growing over time, and then teach them to save. Teach them to set aside at least 20% of their income on an annual basis throughout their career and put that into a disciplined portfolio. Because without that, this fiction of high rates of return over long periods of time in their life will allow them to think that they could save less than what is actually required for them to have financial independence one day in the future. And the name of the game is not stock trading to get the greatest returns you can this year. The name of the game is financial independence over decades and decades of life, and not having to depend on your kids financially when you're in your old age. And let your kids know that's the game you're playing. That the game that I'm playing, and I tell my kids this all the time, the reason we save money is so we don't have to live with you when we're older. My kids are cute and young. Right now they're 9, 10, 11. They would be perfectly happy to live with mom and dad the rest of their life or have us live with them. But we know how that changes. They become productive adults. And we don't need to put them in that situation where they may have to choose their own financial independence or taking care of their mom and dad in their old age. So with that, I just encourage all of you, have this conversation with your kids. Take the time, go to our webpage, read this article, make a comment below about what you've seen your kids get exposed to in school that leads them to inappropriate financial habits and risk-taking behavior that will not serve them as they become productive adults in society. Because frankly, it's this kind of learning that's likely to make them unproductive as adults in society. And with that, we hope that this episode has been a contribution to you being able to design and build a good life.